Test. Maxwell's are sick, or at least one of them is. I think Laura's picking up Justin, maybe. Yep. So Kenny's in there studying. Is this it? Huh?
Julia says running late. Nikki says also running late.
All right. Good morning. No. Nope. No PowerPoint today. Are we ready, Jeff? Okay. Sarah, do you want to open us up in prayer? Pray for, keep Pastor too sick.
Lord, thank you for the opportunity to come here today to be together. We've been with our three members. We know that our time here will edify each other. We pray for those that are sick, that you would heal them and bring them back to us. And we pray for the service today, that the message that you prepare would be good for our souls. And you would give Penny the words to speak and Justin the words that you want spoken.
Amen. All right. So continuing on, looking at the wisdom of Yeshua. So a quick review. A couple weekends ago, Yeshua is speaking to his disciples, and he states that he is there to not abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So he starts going into the intent of specific parts of the law. And the one we discussed a couple weekends ago, had good discussion on, was divorce. So Jesus brings up divorce, which, at the time, divorce had become pretty common. The reasons for divorce were being abused, especially by the political and religious leaders within Israel. So Jesus addresses that. And we looked at some of the reasons that constitutes a divorce, but really it's Jesus is stressing the importance of the contract that's made, and the fact that the Pharisees were and people in general in Israel were divorcing for the most minor issues, like we mentioned, and this is in the rabbinical writings, a husband didn't like how her wife cooked, or really kind of menial issues like that, and they would gain a certificate of divorce, or what Scripture calls the get. So the next one that Jesus addresses and remember, he's speaking to his disciples, who he says are, we are to be the salt of the earth and the light that shines through the earth. And a huge part of that, or what's required of that is righteousness. So that righteousness obviously can only be found through Christ, and who, as he stated, completely fulfills the law. So as part of the law, he continues on and brings up murder. Pretty obvious one, but Jesus goes into more detail on what the intent of the law was regarding murder. I'll read it really quick. Verse 21, Matthew 5. It says, "You have heard that our fathers were told, 'Do not murder,' and that anyone who commits murder will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who nurses anger against his brother will be subject to judgment, that whoever calls his brother you good for nothing will be brought before the Sanhedrin, that whoever says fool incurs the penalty of burning in the fire of Gehenna. So if you are offering your gift at the temple altar and you remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift where it is by the altar and go, make peace with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. If anyone sues you, come to terms with him quickly while you and he are on the way to court, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer of the court, and you may be thrown into jail. Yes, indeed, I tell you, you will certainly not get out until you have paid the last penny." So when Jesus addresses murder, it's not just, the murder that we would consider at face value, but ultimately it's a condition of the heart and how we view those around us and our attitude towards them. I'll read Romans 15, 1 through 6 real quick. Romans chapter 15. "So we who are strong have a duty to bear the weakness of those who are not strong, rather than please ourselves. Each of us should please his neighbor and act for his good, thus building him up." Quick question. What would you consider to be this weakness? If someone, in this context is considered weak, what's it referring to? We who are strong have a duty to bear the weaknesses of those who are not strong. Come on, trying to get that hamster running.
Hold on. Reading before and after to see what.
Romans 15, verse 1.
Well, the verses before we were talking about, you can do whatever you want, but it's wrong just because you can. If it's going to cause problems for somebody next to you in their walk, then you shouldn't be doing it. So maybe talking about the weaknesses or those pieces of the flesh that our brothers are still working through. Even if it's not something that we struggle with. Thinking about talking about food and drink. I don't pour on the liquor when my dad's over for dinner.
Right.
Even though he probably wouldn't have a problem with it, but still out of respect and deference for him, I wouldn't. Or if I'm going to have a friend over that I know doesn't eat meat, I'm not going to put a roast out.
Right. Yeah, so it's in regard to our weakness to the flesh, I guess, to simplify it, which I think we all have in some regard, right? There's some aspect of our life that we struggle with. Some alcohol, some could be money, success, power. What's that? So how would you bear, you mentioned one thing, bearing that weakness, you're, you show respect, not,
You ever go to a vegetarian's house and the most boring dinner ever?
yeah. Don't bring a New York with you. Eat in front of
In
them.
the car. Yeah. Just because you can doesn't mean you always should. And even if it's something you find enjoyable, there's not always a time and place to do this.
Right.
I think before that, it says something about one man considers a day holy, and the other considers every day
Yeah, some
as it is.
people observe like what the new moon festival. So,
Yeah.
some people observe Christmas, which, I've heard other Christians kind of get upset with because they feel it's a pagan holiday.
Which it is,
Pros and
but
cons, okay.
yeah,
I mean, I'm not gonna,
I'm not gonna.
like my sister doesn't go to church anymore, but she doesn't schedule her kids' birthday parties at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning because she, you know, understands that the people that she wants there are not going to be available during those times. So rather than scheduling it because she can and then raising a stink because nobody came, she recognizes that there's parts of other people's lives that are important to them and does, schedules accordingly.
Yeah. And it's also being attuned, and it's all people that are, new to the faith or, immature in the faith, just to be aware of that which, this again goes back to our attitude towards people and the time it takes to be attentive to understand who they are and what their weaknesses are. For some, like, politics is one, that's, especially when you're not really firm in your faith, you can tend to get worked up and, can be a, what's the word? More important topic in your life than it needs to be or should be. So, having understanding that, that especially someone that's kind of new, to either keep politics out of it or keep it to a minimum. I'm just thinking back to the previous church I was at. had an individual that was pretty passionate about what side they were on. Shouldn't matter though. Yeah, so comes back to our attitude and our consideration for one another. Another good example of attitude, we all know this story, but I'll read it anyway. Mark 10. So Mark 10, verse 17. As he was starting on his way, a man ran up, kneeled down in front of him, and asked, "Good Rabbi, what should I do to obtain eternal life?" Yeshua said to him, "Why are you calling me good? No one is good except God. You know the mitzvah: don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't give false testimony, don't defraud, honor your father and mother." "Rabbi," he said, "I have kept all these since I was a boy." Yeshua looked at him, felt love for him, and said to him, "You're missing one thing. Go sell whatever you own, give to the poor, and you will have riches in heaven. Then come follow me." Shocked by this word, he went away sad because he was a wealthy man. So I bring this up as an example because his attitude was more towards his possessions and the fact that, at the end of the day, he valued his wealth over his own life. I think he understood who who Yeshua was, and his attitude towards his possessions was such that he was willing to forego his own life to maintain his possessions.
Could I put forward another potential
Sure.
way to spin that? So in the law, it's not a commandment to be poor. It's not a commandment to sell all of your belongings and give that to the poor. It does say, be loving to your neighbor, share, some that you have, but it doesn't say to get rid of all that you own. This is something new.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a way, we'll be looking at adultery and honoring, honor God above all else. So, I mean, he's already missed
Yeah.
a couple of those.
But this young man has kept all of the commandments. He's kept the law since he was a boy. He's checked the boxes. He's done what he believes is like beyond the bare minimum. But he wants the checklist. He's got the checklist, and then it's like it's good enough if I can keep by this checklist. And so the attitude of like I'll be good if I can just keep to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's upset when he's given a new instruction that it's a little more abstract.
Right.
And I think that when I read the story about the guy here, he's probably bummed about that piece, but I think a lot of this is its attitude too of not so much that like he was upset that he didn't want to go sell all the things that he had, but the attitude was like when you're given another instruction, it's like, ugh, never mind, I'm done. Like, I think I'm explaining this poorly, but I feel like this guy, it's more than just being bummed about being told you needed to sell all you have and give it to the poor, and then that's like the line for him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of us have the attitude of like, what is the bare minimum we can get away with and still be quote unquote good, and then feel completely like when you're asked one more thing, it's like, forget it.
Right. I agree with that inclination, but I would, given Jesus' response to his reaction, I think it was more in line with the fact that he valued what he had more than what Yeshua was offering. But you do bring up a good point. Yeah, and this brings back, I mean, this fits right in with what I was discussing earlier, that, the majority of, especially the religious and political leaders were guilty of, is the law had become more of a dogmatic document, like a checklist. I've been, at face value, I've kept all these laws, so I am righteous. And, both here and back in Matthew 5, Yeshua's getting more to the crux of the intent of what each of these laws represents.
But that's what, well, it's nice to have the checklist.
It is. We love having a black and white, this is good, this is bad, this is what I need to do, this is what I don't need to do.
The reality is God wants everything. Like, we're not even supposed to covet, anything
Right.
on this earth. We're supposed to covet the Lord.
Right.
And, for each of us, I think he may ask different things. And so for this person, Jesus looked at him and said, oh, you're doing really great, but you're still holding on too much to everything that you have on this earth. You should just get rid of it.
Right.
Focus just on God. And
Right.
And yeah, it's, and at different points in your life, it may change too.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It might not even be, the riches isn't the thing to focus on, it's the thing that he was holding on to and not willing to give to God, that God
Right.
told him to give up. So
Right.
just fill in the blank of whatever that thing might be for you.
Yep.
God just, Jesus wants us to put it all away. Just give it all to God.
Because this line is totally used by folks to be like, if you have money, you're doing something wrong. Because
Right.
you need to be, make yourself destitute before you can be acceptable.
Right.
And that's not the reality that we've seen throughout Scripture.
Right. It really comes down to your attitude, the attitude towards whatever that is.
It will be the riches, but not everything.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Attitude, like the one thing I do have control over that I don't want to change.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Or, we'll come back to that. Attitude is something we do have control over. So Jeff, you mentioned coveting, which is a good segue into the next topic that Yeshua brings up. Matthew 5, verse 27. You have heard that our fathers were told, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that a man who even looks at a woman with the purpose of lusting after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you sin, gouge it out, throw it away. Better that you should lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand makes you sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better that you should lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. So this, when I first read this verse, or not when I first, but when I read this verse, it almost appears as if it's addressing men specifically, or not men as in people or mankind, but men as in gender. And it always seemed to me through whether it's social media or TV that I would have guessed that women are more prone to adultery, but looking at the statistics, the latest statistics are that 20% of men who are married cheat on their spouse and 13% of women. So I got to thinking, well, why do I have that perspective? And I think part of it is that when women are exposed to being a adulterer, it's magnified by whether it's social media. I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like women have it's not a equal judgment between men and women. I feel like women are yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I was thinking about Elon Musk. He has what, 14 kids with 4 different men. Granted, he's not married. He was married. Women. Yeah. Did I say men? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Women. Whoops. So, and you'd think people would be talking about that more, in the news or in social media, but if it, it's like, thinking if the roles were reversed, if it was a woman, who had 14 kids with 4 different men, the outlook on her would be quite a bit different. Now, I don't know why I brought that up, but just the fact that in terms of seriousness, it's equal for both parties, whether you're a woman or a man. So
Do you know how they define adultery in that statistic?
in that statistic, it's the one I read is physical intercourse. So
If his audience was the disciples, then would he be talking basically to a larger audience of men anyways?
yeah. Yes. So then I got to thinking, well, if we treated this law, this part of the law, do not commit adultery, as the Pharisees did, the amount of options we have available today for, not doing the physical act, but still fulfilling in some way that desire, i.e. pornography. And, from what I've heard in the news, the type of pornography that are available now, I mean, if you can dream it up, it probably exists out there. And so then I looked at the statistics for, the amount of practicing Christians, men, who have or actively consume pornography, and it's 54% of men that are professing Christians. So over half. And I'd say there's only 2 service members here, but I don't know how it was on the subs, but I mean, pornography was as common as, the Seinfeld showed. You'd walk down in the berthing and have guys sitting there watching the stuff like it was a common thing. So that was what, 20 years ago? So, I mean, it's even prevalent today, even more so. So then I looked at the statistic for men in general, not just practicing Christians, and it's estimated that upwards of 80% of men have viewed or are actively viewing pornography. So when, we've been talking about attitude, and I wonder if, because sex is there's 3 primary causes for divorce that are common. So it's money, sex, and what's the other one? Communication? Yeah.
I mean, they could all be, communication really is like the one, and then
Right.
you can kind of branch them.
Right. So, with sex being one of the top 3 reasons for divorce, I tend to think that divorce and pornography use has caused or is due to the change in how we view sex. And I mean, often we view sex, and I'm speaking about this as a man. I'm glad the kids left.
I was going to say, like, making sure they
Yeah.
support it.
But, this is a topic in Scripture, and just as much as every other topic that we talk about, so.
I just have to create some explanations.
Yeah. No, if the kids stayed in here, I wouldn't have discussed this. But so, the way we view sex, especially as a man, it is kind of a means to, instant gratification instead of a spiritual unification. So I remember in Genesis 2:23 and 24, it says the man The man person said, "At last, this is a bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She is to be called woman because she was taken out of man. This is why man is to leave his father and mother and stick with his wife, and they are to be one flesh." So intimacy, I'll use intimacy in lieu of sex, is a act that is unifying, to become one body. I've read that it's, some people call it a spiritual unification. I don't know, you married couples, I don't know if you've noticed, but after intimacy, things seem to function better, right? I don't know if that's been your experience. If you're going through, we went through Love and Respect, last year or the year before, and Dr. Eggerichs talks about the cycle or the circle we get into. Huh?
Crazy cycle.
Yeah, crazy cycle. And, it seems to me that when your communication, when you improve upon or get past that communication barrier, that, oftentimes we establish because, either we want to remain angry or, whatever the reason is. I don't know if it's your experience, but, when you improve that communication and you come together and, share an intimacy, that that relationship improves. So it tends to operate better, at least for a time, until we find ourselves back in that cycle or circle. And this is why, in part, I think Yeshua equates just looking at a woman in lust as adultery, because we've already reduced, when we do that, we've already reduced intimacy to a physical gratification. I'm not, if I'm not looking at another woman because I'm, desiring, to further a relationship. It's a physical gratification that I'm looking to fulfill my flesh. So I wonder if we change our attitude or how we view intimacy. As a woman, maybe we would stop viewing intimacy as an obligation or a favor to our husbands, and instead, even though I know Paul accounts for this in 1 Corinthians when he, says for a time, come to agreement to, withhold and then come back together after, such time like for prayer or whatever, so that you're not tempted by the adversary. So if we changed our attitude towards intimacy, would a woman, and I'm just making assumption based on, my own relationship and, how I think a woman views it. Am I wrong in saying that sometimes it's viewed as a obligation or doing a favor? No? Yes? Am I wrong? Sometimes? No answer. Okay, I'll move on. So instead of viewing it as an obligation, women, maybe would change our attitude towards it and view it as a unifying act. At the same time, as a man, maybe we would stop viewing our spouses at times as sexual objects or intimacy as a immediate physical gratification, and also view it as a way to remain close and unified with our spouse. Again, I think women approach it a little differently than men do. So having a different attitude or viewpoint towards it, which I think is in large part why men have such a huge issue with pornography. If we could change how we view it, I think that would help. It's not to gratify the flesh. It's something that was given to us to God to unify us, to solidify a relationship. But ultimately, this law addresses one's ability to honor a covenant and the seriousness of a covenant. So when we enter into a marriage contract, I think again Yeshua is reiterating how serious that contract is, and that even by looking at another individual in lust or desire would be considered adultery. Because he reiterates this again in verse 33 of Matthew 5. It says, "Again, you have heard that our fathers were told, 'Do not break your oath and keep your vows to Adonai.' But I tell you not to swear all, not by heaven, because it is God's throne." And then it says, "Not by earth, because it is his footstool, and not by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. And don't swear by your head, because you can't make a single hair white or black. Just let your yes be a simple yes, and your no be a simple no. Anything more than this has its origin in evil." So, again, reiterating that oath, carrying that back to the marriage contract. And I found it interesting. It says that, just having let your yes be yes and your no be no, and that anything more than this has its origin in evil. And I was wondering what is that referring to? Like, what is he getting at? What? Anything more than just yes, my word has its origin in evil. And I think because anything more than that, you've already introduced a notion of fraudulence into it. Because you're assuming if you have to say any more than, if you have to make an agreement above my simple word of yes, then there's already an assumption of, fraudulence or dishonesty. Whereas, we're to be individuals who are honest and adhere to a covenant, adhere to agreements. So, if we're righteous, then our yes should simply be trustworthy.
So if there's a maybe, then there's potential for getting your way out of it.
Yeah. Or if you have to make if you have to promise, swear on God. I swear to God, I will do that. Why would you have to go above and beyond just a simple yes? Is it, you're indicating that either I have an untrustworthy character, or there's a assumption that I have an untrustworthy character? So going back to adultery, without turning to Ephesians 5, It equates, I think, and we've all read this verse, where it equates our marriage to a relationship with Yeshua and the church. And so when we carry over the analogy of adultery, which God uses, very often in the Old Covenant between Israel and its idolatry and adultery, I was trying to think of an example, that Yeshua brings up, where if a man simply looks on another woman in lust, it's considered adultery. If I were to carry that over to the spiritual aspect, God would consider not just practicing another religion or worshiping another god or another object. He would also consider what? Adultery. If he had to correlate it back to lusting over someone other than Yeshua.
Wanting to do something
Other than his commands.
his commands.
Carrying our own will. Would that be considered adultery?
Well, yes, but only if it doesn't align with his will.
Okay. All right, I'll stop there. Everybody thoroughly uncomfortable?
Talked about this stuff though, because we haven't talked about that in the Wednesday videos with the love and respect. We covered several of those topics.
Well, I'm uncomfortable talking about it, so.
It wasn't until I watched that I actually saw it in my own life. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah, that cycle, the circle, yeah. Have you seen that yet, Jeff? The crazy cycle, yeah. You guys are still newlyweds. That circle's probably a ways off for you guys yet.
I think there's a bonus to finding your mate in your 30s versus your early 20s, because you can bypass a lot of the immaturity that leads to that cycle.
I found my mate in my 30s.
You got married at 30.
Huh?
Didn't you get married at 30 or
Yeah,
like late?
30.
This 30?
He's saying it's not the same for him.
Oh, well, that's a big problem.
I'll talk to you in 10 years to see if you still have avoided that cycle.
Holly and Jeff joined with Holly already having teenagers. So, and you and Dustin were married at 15, something. I mean, it's a totally different.
Mm-hmm.
My, yeah, my,
I'm sure those two relationships are just because you, like you said, your maturity, your age.
my entire first marriage was the crazy cycle, because it, I mean, it takes two to tango like that, but someone has to have the maturity to break that, and I was not there.
Yeah.
And emotional affairs occur much more frequently in women than men, and I'm curious to know what those statistics cite, having been on that.
Good luck getting accurate polling on that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. No one loves to
I'm sure,
have their shame laid bare.
I think men are a little more open to share that. I don't know, maybe not.